members will take your seats, we'll go ahead and get started again. 9:29, just a minute early, but I believe our Department of Public Safety is already here. Colonel Wright, I see you and your crew in the back. You're welcome to approach the podium to our left and go ahead and get started.
You ready, Mr. Chairman?
Yes, sir. Go ahead.
All right. Good morning, Mr. Chairman. It is truly an honor for us to be here with y'all this morning. I'm thankful for this opportunity to speak with you and the members of this committee. I have with me this morning Lieutenant Colonel Stephanie Stallings. She's the Director of Administrative and Support Operations. Major Mark Perry, who is our Headquarters Adjutant, and Miss Lori Smith, who is our Comptroller and Chief Financial Officer. I am 3.5 months into my position, and I realize I have a tremendous amount to learn about the legislative and budget process. I accept this responsibility with tremendous humility, respect, and concern for the members of this agency. We have a new command staff in place at DPS, and I assure you that we are committed to working closely with our legislators. Our commitment is to be transparent and responsive to you and the citizens of this state. We know the closer that we work with you, we will achieve better results while providing safety to the citizens of this state. Before we leave today, I intend to provide each of you with information on how you can contact any member of our command staff at any time that you need them. Effective, responsive communication with you is our priority. The command staff expectation of each member of this agency is to build meaningful and lasting relationships, both internally and externally. We realize this is the spirit in moving our agency forward to a brighter and more sustainable future. I assure you our commitment will always be to work hard for the employees of this agency and the citizens of this state. We believe the positive interactions with our employees that our employees make every single day with members of the public will pay huge dividends for this agency, this state, and the law enforcement profession. We expect every member of our agency to be leaders in their communities and leaders in the law enforcement profession. I'd like to direct your attention to some of the photographs that Ms. Lori will share with you as I speak this morning. The Department of Public Safety regularly participates in community-related activities to support and keep us in touch with those that we serve. This past year, we proudly participated in Faith in Blue events across the state. During National Faith in Blue Weekend, law enforcement leaders partnered with faith-based leaders to focus on commonalities between the two and the importance of building positive, sustainable relationships. Also each year, DPS partners with local Toys for Tots organizers. Since 2009, our employees have collected almost $1 million in monetary donations to help with Toys for Tots program and almost $500,000 toys. Each year, troopers and officers participate in the annual Shop with a Cop events in their local communities. This is a great opportunity for our agency to make memorable Christmases and lasting impressions on these children. Connecting with our youth at a young age helps us to establish trust and promotes the future of our agency. Finally, DPS members were very proud to participate in Clark's Christmas for Kids for the second year in a row. As an agency, our people love their communities and they serve with a servant's heart. The people of our agency stand tall in the face of tremendous adversity, provocation, and challenge. This has never before been truer than it has been in 2020. As the command staff, we appreciate the contributions of each employee and recognize that our employees are our most valuable resource. Without them, there is no Department of Public Safety. We are committed to rewarding and recognizing them for their sacrifices. Without law enforcement, there is no peace in our communities and there is no freedom in our daily lives. In our society, there are the protectors and the protected. Our agency has proudly served and protected during the most difficult time witnessed in modern history. We are all proud to be the #1 state to do business. But most importantly, we need to be the safest #1 state to do business, to live, and to raise our families. I am proud of the men and women in our agency. They are compassionate and professional. DPS has taken on additional duties since March of 2020. With the arrival of the coronavirus, the Department of Public Safety was tasked as the lead agency in enforcing the governor's executive order. To date, we have answered over 3,300 calls for service related to the executive order. In addition to answering calls, the Department of Public Safety officers have assisted with the closure of Georgia's beaches and provided security at quarantine sites and testing locations around the state. DPS staffed the State Operations Center and became the lead ESF 13 agency to coordinate and distribute much-needed PPE, medicine, and ventilators from the Strategic National Stockpile. Our employees even took on the task of assembling much-needed ventilators. We've coordinated over 1,400 relays, of which 783 were handled by our department. DPS has recently conducted 33 relays of the COVID vaccine. Our agency has also been affected by COVID. We've had a total of 453 employees affected by the virus, and 192 have tested positive with the virus. As we do with any natural disaster, DPS responded to tornado damage in North and South Georgia during the pandemic. Our members are always poised to respond to your communities when crisis strikes. Additionally, DPS has been responding to civil unrest around the state, but most significantly here in the Atlanta metro area. Since May 29th, the Department of Public Safety has protected state assets while partnering with the Georgia Bureau of Investigation, DNR, DCS, DOC, DJJ, GEMA, and the National Guard. Because of the trust and relationships that we share between these state agencies and the leadership of Governor Kemp, we have not experienced the violence seen in many other states across the nation. We have increased our presence in Atlanta many weekends in conjunction with the Atlanta Police Department to assist with protests and civil unrest. The election cycle also brought civil unrest to our state, which created additional security concerns for our employees, visitors, and our property. We've increased personnel and added patrols to ensure people and property were safe. Our staff has worked closely with GSAC and the Federal Bureau of Investigation to monitor, evaluate, and constantly update our security operations. This has been an ongoing and time-consuming process while continuing to do the normal job that troopers and officers around the state are required to do each and every day. We are thankful for the relationships in state government. I'd like to take this opportunity to also to inform the committee that we have implemented security upgrades here at the Capitol. We have a strong partnership with GBA, and together we have and continue to make improvements. The most notable is the fence currently under construction that will protect the Capitol. I'll be happy to discuss any of the other upgrades that we've done offline because it's imperative that we protect the integrity of the safety measures that we put in place. Moving on to the budget, Mr. Chairman, please refer to the Governor's budget book for amended fiscal year 2021, page 262, and fiscal year 2022, page 263. The Department of Public Safety fully supports the Governor's budget recommendations for the amended fiscal year 21, which includes $12,390,000 to provide one-time funds for the purchase of 321 vehicles. We also support the fiscal year 2022 recommendation of $3,176,833 to fund a 75-person trooper school. The 111th trooper school is tentatively set to start September 2021 and will graduate April of 2022. Our plan is to start class with 100 cadets with a goal to graduate 75. I'll just take a note that currently the 110th Trooper School is in session now. It has 54 cadets in it. We've had a an outbreak with COVID, so we've had to take a short break with that class, and we've sent them home for a pause, and we'll resume here in a couple weeks. We're currently evaluating how other states are adjusting policies to increase recruiting levels. We will be forward-thinking as we look to the future of DPS. We support the governor's recommendation for a bond package in the amount of $775,000. This is to purchase a FLIR system for one helicopter and provide an upgrade for the downlink system. These FLIR systems are essential when locating escaped or missing persons and monitoring protests and crowds during darkness. The ability to monitor and track the movement of unlawful behavior under the cover of darkness is priceless. The upgrade will provide a better image quality from a much greater distance. Once this additional FLIR is added, all of our 407 aircraft will be equipped with the FLIR capabilities. Our aircraft capabilities support every region of the state. Local agencies rely heavily on our aviation unit and its FLIR support. DPS also supports the governor's recommendation for a bond package for the construction of a new headquarters building at a cost of $56,410,000. Stevens and Wilkinson Architecture was selected as the architecture firm. Turner Construction has been selected as the construction firm. The plans are complete, and we are currently in the design development phase and preparing the construction documents. The site has been prepped and is ready for groundbreaking. The new facility will be located on the same site as the old police academy on our existing state complex. The construction time is estimated to be 18 to 20 months. DPS supports the governor's recommendation for a bond package of $655,000 for the acquisition of one mobile tower and the construction of 2 stationary towers. A 300-foot tower will be constructed at Post 20 Dublin and one at Post 14 Donaldson, Colquitt. And this will increase and enhance our communications in middle and southwest Georgia. Both towers will provide better communications during emergency situations, particularly in situations as the hurricanes. The mobile tower will provide us the opportunity to set up temporary communications when we lose a tower or communications in a particular area. Mr. Chairman, that concludes our presentation this morning. I'll be glad to try and answer any questions that you might have.
Thank you, Colonel. You do have a few questions. The first comes from the Chairman of Public Safety on the Senate side again, Chairman Albers.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Colonel, thank you so much for the work of your leadership, your staff and team. What you have done over this last year plus has certainly been extraordinary. The professionalism and service does not go unnoticed. And first, let me just say that we have your backs. Secondarily, one of the things that you and I have talked about a little and we've been working on for years is the number of troopers we have. Can you share with us the number of active troopers we have right now?
Yes, sir. We currently are at 783 sworn members right now on the patrol side, and we are around 240 on the motor carrier side.
Thank you. And correct me if I'm wrong, but isn't it true that the number of GSP that we have on the road is a direct equation to how many people will typically lose as a loss of life in traffic accidents every year?
Yes, that's correct.
And just to follow up, one of the things that we've been trying to work on in the past and hoping that we can get a lot of support for moving forward is we have actually less troopers on the road today than we did when Georgia had 5 million people. And knowing that we're eclipsing somewhere around the 11 million number, hopefully, you know, with your trooper school that's currently in place, but others to follow, we can recruit folks. What is the single biggest challenge you're facing as far as recruiting new officers?
Well, Senator, I think most importantly is the current environment that we face. You know, I tell people all the time that people look at the news and they don't have to look far. And these kids and these young people who are looking at us and looking at our profession, they see they're potentially one traffic stop away from being on the national news. And that's scary. So that is a challenge for us. You know, money will always help. We are it's a very competitive market. We're going to have to do things to incentivize people to look to our profession. One of the things that when a couple years ago we did we went around the state and held one-on-one meetings with the staff. And believe it or not, one of the biggest concerns that the young people coming into this profession have is retirement. They are very concerned about retirement. That is the #1 question they ask.
Thank you, Colonel. And final question, if I could. As we look forward, we did a good job, I believe, several years ago in having a very large pay increase for our state law enforcement officers. And we were down at the very bottom of that list. That really rose us up into the rankings. However, since then, I know in talking to some of our counterparts in other states, they have done the same. I'd like to ask you at our subcommittee meetings if you could bring maybe an updated salary schedule of where we're falling in comparison to other states, so we can be able to have some good math and facts behind that.
Yes, sir, I
Thank
sure
you.
will.
Vice Chairman Perkle.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Colonel, thank you for your presentation and your service to our great state. I, along with many in this room, have done ride-along with the State Patrol to find out what happens in the field to get more acclimated. One of the concerns that several of the members that I have talked with is regarding communication, the ability to communicate with local law enforcement. I noticed you mentioned the construction of 2 communication towers throughout the state. Going forward, is there a plan? Is there a grand plan in place to allow you to communicate more effectively over the radio with the locals as you're spotting a suspicious and you need backup, and there's I can hit one link in order to gain access to local law enforcement people, or is it because we have such a massive different communication systems throughout the state that this is untenable at this time? It's kind of like being hot in the summer. There's not a lot you could do about that.
Well, the problem that we run into across the state is a lot of local agencies have their own radio systems, and that's challenging for us because when we work in, obviously different counties and many jurisdictions across the state. So what we have found is at the local level, we have had to put, some of the troopers have 2 and 3 radios in their cars because just to have that ability to communicate. Those 2 towers that we spoke of earlier, that's a starting point for building a statewide communication center when we put these towers up. It is one of the things that keeps me up at night is our ability for our officers, our troopers and officers, to be able to communicate effectively and make sure that somebody's going to answer that radio. We desperately need a statewide communication system in this state, because if we don't, it's something that was, the 9/11 Commission, after 9/11, it was one of the biggest concerns that came out of that commission report, and it's one of the things that haunts us. If we ever have a huge disaster in the state, it's going to be something that's going to be hindering us to effectively communicate. So it's certainly something that's got to have progress and continue to work.
A follow-up, Mr. Chairman? Would it be possible, or you need to move on?
Sure. Go ahead.
In that regards, in my actual ride-along, there was an individual was pulled over. We did not have a cell service. We didn't have radio service. There was no way even to check the license. So in parts of the state, there is the deserts, the communication deserts, and I am pleased that one of your priorities is addressing the communication issue, because it's vital for your people. I appreciate you doing that.
Yes, sir. Thank you.
Senator Beach.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Colonel, thank you for what you do to keep our citizens safe. My question is, I'm glad to see we're investing in aviation and a new helicopter and the equipment for the aircraft. Are we looking at any drone technology or any cutting-edge technology from drones?
Yes, sir. We actually have drones within our agency. Our SCIRT team utilizes drones to map scenes. I think that was one of the things that was presented last year in the presentation. It's a very high-tech system to where When we have a fatal crash on the interstate, you know, in the past, the interstate could be shut down for hours. Now the ability with this new drone system that we have, they can literally map that scene in, you know, 30 minutes and get the roadway back open. Our SWAT team uses the drone system. We have about 50 drones within our agency right now that we're utilizing. And it's not just for us. We use anytime a local agency needs that use, anytime the Department of Transportation needs them to help map roadways. It's a resource that goes well beyond our agency, and we always extend that partnership to help anybody that we can use those resources with.
Thank you, Colonel. I think we have a few questions online. Chairman England?
Yes, sir. Okay. The first one's from Representative Roger Bruce. Given what has happened in Washington, D.C., do you have the resources in place to anticipate any issues here in Georgia to protect our capital? And if not, what is needed?
Yes, sir. As many of you probably noticed as you came in this morning, we certainly have the resources here on the grounds and within a very close proximity if we have any issues. We are constantly monitoring and evaluating the intel that comes in from GSAC and the FBI to adjust our security operations plan. We've had no issues to this point, and so we're well poised to handle any situation.
Good deal. Next one's from down on the coast, Representative Al Williams. What is considered full strength? And I guess he's referring to troopers on the road.
Well, I don't know if there's an exact number. You know, we've talked about the number of 860 in years past, but we've always had a goal of trying to get to 1,000 troopers on the roadway since I've been on 28 years.
Okay. And the next one, and it's the last one I've got on here, is from a fellow that might know just a little bit about what y'all do, Chairman Hitchens. And he's just basically making a comment that while manpower is an issue, for the first time that he's aware, retention of mid-career personnel is becoming a bigger issue. Troopers leaving to go to local agencies is a reversal of what we've seen through the history of DPS. And, you know, I know we run into that on fresh folks coming in, but as he's seen, and I have too, and I'm sure y'all have, is that we've got some of the midline folks, mid-career folks that are now moving over. So it's, like I said, it's more of a comment, I guess, than a question.
Yes, sir, and I don't mind making a comment about that if you would like. We're looking at some incentives now. One of the options is funding a college incentive pay for education. It's currently outlined in the official code of Georgia. It's been there since the 70s. It's just never been fully funded or never been funded. This would provide an incentive pay for levels of academic achievement. Other agencies in Georgia, local agencies, are already utilizing this as a recruiting and a retention tool. We currently have, we just looked at all this, so I've got some numbers here on it. We currently have 119 employees with associate's degrees, 198 with bachelor degrees, and 49 with master's degrees. We hope in the future to be able to provide $3,000, $5,000, and $6,000 respectively for these degree achievements. We've been working with OPB to see if that funding source is, you know, sustainable in the future under our current budget. Our communications personnel, we're seeing them leave as well, leave to go to 911 centers in the state. We'd like to provide them with an incentive pay once they complete their mandated 911 training. That's a new mandated training that all of the communications personnel have to go through. And so we're also discussing that option with OPB as well. The college incentive pay and the incentive pay for the communications operators under our current numbers, it's about a physical impact of about $2.8 million is what it would take to do that. The other thing, like Chairman Hitchens mentioned, troopers now, once they get to 7.5 years of service, they tap out at the level of rank structure that they move into, and that's with a TFC 3 and an MCO 3. So once they make that rank at 7.5 years, unless they're participating in a competitive rank, that's it for them. So from there until they retire, unless, you know, we give them a raise, they don't get anything else. So there's not an incentive for them to stay beyond that point. So one of the things we like to do is offer re-implement a senior and master trooper program. And as a senior trooper, maybe something like 2.5%, and once they get 20 years on as a master trooper, maybe 5%. And that would keep the compression under our current rank structure at those levels. And right now, I'll just tell you how many people we have, just to show you the level of seniority that we have in our agency. We only have 101 senior trooper and motor carrier officers that have 12 to 19 years on, and we only have 52 master troopers and officers on the agency at this time. So you can see the majority of our agency is very young. We're a young agency now. And if we did those numbers that I just spoke about, that's about a $508,000 physical impact on our agency. One of the other things, since we're mentioning this, I'll put this to you as well, Mr. Chairman, is we not only see our sworn members leaving and having a difficulty recruiting and retaining them, but we have the same issue on our civilian staff. Our civilian staff, we spend a tremendous amount of time training and educating them about state government, and only for them to leave and go to local governments. We don't have a system in place for the tenure that they have with us. So we're also looking at that with OPB and seeing what a physical impact it would mean for us to try to give people an incentive to stay with us based on their tenure. And based on our numbers, we can try to fix that problem with about $291,000 as far as the physical impact goes.
We're making some notes here, Colonel. Chairman England, do you have any other questions online? No. Exhausted the online questions. Any more questions from the committee members who are present? Seeing none. Colonel, thank you so much. Congratulations on your new position, and thank you for what you're doing for our state.
Thank you. We appreciate what y'all do for us each and every day, and please know that y'all's safety here at this building and around Capitol Hill is our utmost priority when you're here. If there's anything that we can ever do for any of you, please don't hesitate to reach out and call on us, because we're here to help and serve y'all as well. Thank you so much.
Thank you. We're slightly ahead of schedule once again, but let's see if we've got the Supreme Court online. Chief Justice Melton, are you online here with us?
I am. Can you hear me?
Yes, sir. We hear you well. If you don't mind starting a few minutes early, we'll go ahead and cede that time over to you.
Thank you, sir. Thank you, Mr. Chairman and Chairman England. Thank you for your thoughtfulness and how you've arranged for us to participate with you today. I have with me online Justice Boggs. I see Justice Bethel. I believe our Clerk of Court, T. Barnes, is on the call, and also our Director of Fiscal Affairs, Ms. Regina Jones. If it's satisfactory to you, what I plan to do with this time is to give you a general overview of what the courts have been doing across the state, all classes of court during the pandemic. I'll give you an outline of our Supreme Court budget request and overdue of the judicial finances statewide. And then what I would plan to do is turning over to Justice Boggs to give you a slightly more detailed look at the Judicial Council budget. With that, let me just give you an overview of what the court's been doing since the pandemic hit. As you know, we entered our first judicial emergency order in March of 2020. We have a Judicial Emergency Act, which we are thankful for. It's a legislative directive about what I, as the Chief Justice, and what Chief Judges can do across the state in the event of an emergency. It showed a lot of forethought, and it helped structure and organize our responses. But in March, when we issued our first order, we directed the courts to scale down to all but the essential functions. You might know also that under the Emergency Act, our orders last for 30 days, so they have to be renewed for after every 30 days for as long as the governor has a public health emergency. So we scaled down to all but essential functions. those functions were defined as those functions that are necessary to protect the health and safety and liberty of individuals. A few examples of the kinds of things we're looking at are search warrants and arrest warrants, bond reviews, domestic abuse for temporary protective orders are, of course, very front and center, restraining orders, juvenile court emergency removal matters, orders necessary to make kids safe, and of course, mental health commitment hearings. One of the things I like to point out and feel like I need to point out is that our courts did not close. We often use closure as a shorthand for scaling back, but we did not close. Every class of court had work that it had to do that only the courts could do to keep our communities and safe and functioning in the way that we have to carry on. And so everybody had work to do as identified by the list of things that I just listed. And in addition, the courts did all the work necessary to reduce jail populations, to keep those communities safe, and to keep those jail populations from growing. So there's a big focus on having bond hearings and initial appearances with remote technology as quickly as possible, and providing alternatives to sending people to the jails. I see that Presiding Justice Namis has joined us. I want to point him out to you as well. I do want to give a shout out to our accountability courts, especially our mental health courts. When we issued our initial order and tried to define what was an essential service, I urged our courts not to be legalistic in what that meant. If they had a participant in their accountability courts who they knew might unravel in the midst of this pandemic, but they could help if they only reached out and conducted a little bit of contact, then we urged them to do that if they could do so safely. And our accountability courts across the state have done that. And I'm proud of their willingness and eagerness to be mission oriented and not be legalistic. So they have continued to reach out and keep their participants within arm's reach during this time. Since then, the Judicial Council, which is the governing body for all the courts, our Judicial Council has met 30 times since March of last year. By way of comparison, our Judicial Council usually has 4 regularly scheduled meetings each year. We met 30 times. In addition to that, I have conducted, along with the presiding justice, town hall meetings with the Superior Court judges, the state court judges, the magistrate court judges, and the Superior Court clerks. You should know that the prevailing theme in what we've been urging in all our orders and most of our conversations is virtual, virtual, virtual. We wanted the courts to maximize the ability to conduct proceedings in a virtual manner. We've learned some things in the process. There are some tools that we will use going forward, even after COVID. I doubt that we'll have the jail transports that you're used to seeing. We've learned that we can accomplish those goals and objectives using virtual technology in a much safer and cost-effective manner. But that's the main stress that we've been making. In addition to that, when you do have in-person proceedings, we've urged our courts to do so in much smaller groups. That has had an impact on the court's abilities to get through their case logs at a pace that they're accustomed to. But when you do in person, the courts have to do those in much smaller groups with much more distancing than in the past. And then the courts have been working towards reinitiating all services other than jury trials. And again, everything is slower in doing that, and it takes twice as long, sometimes even longer, to work through a calendar or to get through a case log because of the way we have to do it under the COVID world. So the first order was issued in March. By June, we reimposed the filing deadlines and got all those timelines moving again. By July, I created a COVID task force that was chaired and is chaired by then Judge Sean LaGrua, now Justice Sean LaGrua as of yesterday. And That task force consisted of representatives from each class of court and the clerks of the superior courts. And it also included participation by a cross-section of the bar, all cross-sections of the bar. And this task force has been responsible for developing guidelines and principles for all local courts to follow for everything they do, starting with how you pull into the parking lot, to how you get on the elevators, how you go through the security lines, where the participants sit, what kind of safety mechanisms are in place, whether they're plexiglass shields or face masks or shields or both, you name it, all the way through the court process. So that was created in July. In September, we opened up grand jury proceedings. In October, we opened up jury trials. In December, we had to backtrack on the opening of jury trials from October, and we had to shut down jury trials again. That was based on public health advice, and I'll just share with you some numbers just to give you a picture of what we were responding to. So in July, mid-July of 2020, that was our largest peak up until that point. If you look at the graph on the Department of Health website, you'll see this. But July of 2020 was our biggest peak, and you see the 7-day moving average of new cases at about 3,600. In October, when we opened up for jury trials, that number had decreased to about a third of that July peak, down to about 1,200. In December, we see a gigantic spike. In December, we doubled that July peak to about 7,200. And so we felt compelled, based on the public health guidance, to shut down jury trials. We are watching that very closely. We have some governing principles that have been in place throughout. And the first is informed by the fact that when courts are doing business, we are compelling people to attend. Not just the parties in a case, but the employees that have to come into the courthouse, the witnesses that have to come into the courthouse. And for jury trials, we're telling people, the citizens of this state, to get up off their couch and come into our buildings. And so we feel like we have a higher obligation to ensure the safety of all those who come into our facilities. And we've been very careful about how we do that. The judges across the state are very mindful of the backlog. And I personally want to open up jury trials as soon as we can, considering all the factors that have to be considered. The judges are working very hard to dig out of this backlog. It is a slog, and it's going to take some time, because it's a slower process. You may know that one of the ways that courts are able to move through their calendars is by having massive calendar calls. You bring a bunch of people in, and the pressure of even walking into a courthouse oftentimes is enough for the parties to be able to find resolution. Well, we can't bring in the mass numbers of people into the building to even apply that pressure. And so all that means that we have to nibble at the backlog as best we can, and it's going to take some time. Meanwhile, the courts across the state, local courts, have been reconfiguring their courtrooms. They have been acquiring and distributing PPEs. They are engaged in updating their air systems, acquiring new space that's bigger and more expansive so we can spread out. And just by way of example, what we're having to do a lot more now is when a court has a jury trial, it's not the case that all the judges in that circuit can have a jury trial on the same day. One judge will use maybe 2 or 3 different courtrooms just to spread out the participants. One courtroom might be used just for the observers. So that gives you an idea of the kind of space that's required and the impact on the pace of being able to dig out of the jury trial backlog. Our judges have been very mission focused. They've been determined to work through and work long to get out of the backlog and find a new normal to serve the citizens of this state. As for our court has adjusted very well and adjusted very quickly. We adapted right out the gate towards oral arguments by video. Our court has no backlog at all, and I'm proud to say that both our court and the Court of Appeals have met all deadlines, which, as you know, we have a 2-term rule under our Constitution that says that all cases have to be decided within 2 terms of court, and we've been able to do that. In terms of the workload of our court, our new case filings have been down by about 14% compared to last year. There had been an upward trend. And so once the trial courts are able to work through their backlog, we do expect that we'll see that downfall, that drop be filled, and we'll see that upward trend continue. Meanwhile, our judges have been very involved in the administrative matters that we on the Supreme Court have divided amongst ourselves. There's been several rule changes. There are changes that each class of court has implemented that we approve and been actively involved in to maximize use of virtual technology. We've changed rules to allow for continuing legal education to be done by video at in a more accessible fashion. And then also, and first, and even larger than all that, the move to a virtual bar exam was huge. The process of convincing that the very stressed third-year graduates of law school that we're going to take the bar for the first time by video and it'll be fine was a huge undertaking. We were able to do that. We were pleased with the outcomes. But there are many other ways in which our court has been involved in just the governance matters throughout the judiciary as we've had the shift. Turning to our budget, I do want to just point out, big picture, that our court participated fully and earnestly last year when we were asked to submit 14% cuts. I also want to add that all justices of our court voluntarily offered the furlough equivalent of up to 13 days. In doing that, we expressed our concern that the 14% cuts would have a devastating impact on our ability to do what you expect us to do and what we are called to do under our Constitution and under the laws of this state. And you clearly were very sensitive to that, and we thank you for how you struck the balance there, resulting in about a 5.3% reduction as opposed to a 14%. That 5.3 reduction is slightly higher than the judicial branch average of 4.37%. And as discussed in a little bit, we were able to meet those reductions largely by taking cuts out of our IT budget. As far as the supplemental budget is concerned, we have 2 requests. The first request is to restore savings that were resulted from a term clerk position when Justice Blackwell left our court. We had a lull in filling that position, and we were able to save $50,000. But you see the request for $50,776 is to make sure that money is there now for the term clerk who has now begun. And then item 2 in the supplemental budget is for $14,560. That also relates to some degree to Justice Blackwell's departure. When we moved into the new building, we had funding for new furniture for each of the justices in the new justices' chambers in the new building. Justice Blackwell, however, had his own furniture, so we never bought furniture for his chambers. And when he left, oddly enough, he took his furniture with him. And so we are asking for money to purchase that furniture. It was initially allocated for us. It was not spent, and it ultimately was spent for other purposes not related to our court. So those are the 2 items that we're asking for the supplemental budget. In the big budget, there are several items that we are requesting. First, you'll see the item that I mentioned before that's in the supplemental budget, $50,776. And then dropping down to item 2, there are funds we're requesting for $97,500. I will point out that those funds are for our IT department, which was cut $214,000 throughout the process, budgetary process last year. We're asking for $97,500. That consists of replacing 2 server nodes. Those server nodes cost $90,000 total, $90,000. We have 6 that we ultimately that we have 6 nodes total, server nodes total, but we want to purchase and replace 2 of those. And then we probably will need to come back and replace those other ones at a later date. And then $7,500 will cover the cost for repair and streaming equipment that we were utilizing at a much higher rate. So the total request for item 2 is $97,500. Item 3 is just basic court supplies and materials in the amount of $65,516. That restores a cut of $65,000, and actually we are spending slightly more than what was cut. And then also, and item 4 is the GBA maintenance and repairs costs. That amount is for $26,654. We have an item that we did not include in our budget submissions to the governor. This is for IT personnel in the amount of $95,698. And I want to just pause here and make the case for this request. Our Supreme Court currently has 3 IT personnel. The Court of Appeals has 3, just by way of comparison. But I want to tell you what our 3 IT personnel are involved with. They support the Supreme Court, the Office of Bar Admissions, and the Reporter of Decisions, and the Statewide Business Court. We just recently started assisting with the Statewide Business Court. The Supreme Court has 75 personnel, full-time employees, plus 15 law school interns. The Office of Bar Admissions has 9 full-time employees, and the Office of Bar Admissions, as you are aware, conducts the bar exam, and this year was a huge undertaking to be able to undertake that exam in a virtual format. The Reporter of Decisions is the office that publishes all our opinions, both for our court and the Court of Appeals. Our IT folks support that entity, and our IT folks have volunteered to do all the IT work for the business court, which has 7 full-time employees and 3 interns. And more recently, they started streaming their hearings, and our IT folks are supporting each hearing that they are conducting. So we did not initially put that in our request, but we are more and more convinced that we're going to need that. So with your indulgence, we do ask that you consider our request for $95,698 for an additional IT person that would be dedicated to cyber security and network security. Item 5 is a rent allocation. That one can get confusing. I'll be happy to go into detail. Probably need our fiscal folks to help explain that. But if you have questions about that, that's what we're being billed by the Georgia Building Authority. The request there is an amount for $516,253. And then likewise, we have the National Center for State Courts, a request for $220,328. That amount is based on our population. They had worked with us during our budget cuts. And what they said this year was, we will take a reduction in what we pay to them that's equivalent to the cuts that we've taken as a state agency. And so this number reflects an 11% discount from what we would otherwise be billed. I will point out that if you draw a line above the cybersecurity insurance, below the IT security analyst position, and you remove the GBA and the National Centers for State Courts funding piece, our total request, it represents a 2.38% increase. And so when you add these pass-through items that are added to our budget, then the total results in about a 7.57% increase. The National Center for State Courts serves all classes of court throughout the state, not just our court. It just happens to be in our budget because it has to be somewhere. At one point, it was within the administrative office of the court budget, but now it's in our court budget. Also, now we'll turn it over to Justice Boggs to go in a little bit more detail about the Judicial Council budget. I will point out that the Judicial Council, administrative office of the courts in particular, also fully and earnestly participated in a 14% reduction request. The Judicial Council budget resulted in a cut of about 13.35%, which was probably one of the more severe cuts. Many of those cuts were to services and programs that you have favorably received in the past, and we hope to be able to build those back up at a reasonable pace. And I'll turn it over to Justice Boggs to kind of go over those real quickly for you.
Thank you, Chief, and good morning. Chairman Tillery, Chairman England, members of the committee, thank you for the opportunity to briefly present the Judicial Council budget. It can be found in Section 6 of both the amended and the big budgets. As you know, the Judicial Council represents a wide array of entities. I serve as the chair of the Standing Committee on Budget for the Judicial Council. Those entities that fall within my purview include the AOC, of course, but also several grant programs that they fund, including domestic violence programs, kinship care programs. They also include councils of various classes of courts, including the municipal, magistrate, probate, and state court councils. Their budget that I handle also includes the Council of Accountability Court Judges, the Institute of Continuing Judicial Education, the JQC, and the Georgia Resource Center. So a wide array of services that are provided within the budget of the Judicial Council. We had been asked last year at the end of the year to meet with former Chairman Andy Welch to present our full budget. We did not request in the amended budget any enhancements. Chairman Welch had requested, however, that we consider some COVID-related matters that had an unfair impact on the AOC. And so we do ask, with your indulgence, to request 2 enhancement items for the amended fiscal year 21 budget. Those 2 items are as follows. One is an IT desktop support position. Not unlike other agencies or other entities, the AOC has seen a 650% increase in Judicial Council meetings and IT support for staff and clients due to increased demands resulting from virtual work environments. That IT desktop support position is critically needed in order to comply with all of the various requests that we are now getting that are all really COVID-related positions. That request is $88,654. Chairman Welch had asked that we include that in our amended request now. And so we are doing that. That would be a $54,830 salary for that position, but plus fringe would bring to the request amount of $88,654. The second request for the amended fiscal year budget for the Judicial Council would be $75,000 for the Georgia Courts Registry. The Georgia Courts Registry houses courts' professional information, including CLE credits, memberships, and information on court reporters and interpreters and compliance with all of their requirements. Currently, the vendor won't support the roughly 10,000 records that we maintain there. And so this request would be needed to upgrade and maintain the registry to keep our records secure and accessible to our clients. And so we would ask for for favorable consideration of those two requests for the Judicial Council amended fiscal year 21 budget. That's $88,654 for an IT desktop position and $75,000 for the Georgia Courts Registrar upgrade. Those are the two requests for the amended budget. Again, the FY22 budget, the Judicial Council budget, is contained within section 6, which appears beginning on page 5 of HB 81, which is the governor's FY22 budget. We have 4 requests actually 5 requests now that I'd like to make known to the committee. First, we are going to be asking for an increase to the grant for legal services to victims of domestic violence. Just to give you a brief background, the Civil Legal Services to Victims of Domestic Violence grant program has been funded in Georgia since 1999. The funding prior to the cuts last year was $2.5 million. The grant program was cut almost $1 million last year, so we're down to 1.5, and we're asking for $175,000 to restore some of the funding for that grant program that is administered by the AOC. The Civil Services to Domestic Violence grant program provides services to in providing over 3,300 protective orders last year, protecting over 6,000 women, 3,000 children. 691 victims received custody of their children. It is estimated that these grant programs saved the state $15 million in providing these services and extra benefits in housing and Social Security and otherwise benefits for these individuals who are victims of domestic violence. So we're trying to inch our way back to the full funding of that very important program, and we're asking for 175. And you'll see that on line 179 of the budget. In addition, you're familiar with the prior request for a grant program administered by the AOC for civil legal services for kinship care families. That program was originally funded at $375. It got increased to $475 in FY20. It was then cut by $249,000. We're asking for $100,000 to be added to the big budget to inch our way back to full funding for the Kinship Care for Families program. As you know, the purpose of the appropriation was to allow for permanent funding to formalize legal custody arrangements between caregivers and their children to ensure that homes would remain safe and stable. I provided you last year and will again provide you this year with a flyer outlining the particulars of who was served and how many people were served. But just to reacquaint you, over 1,140 children were served last year, 809 cases. 57 of the cases were families for outside of the 5 major counties. They saved over $4.2 million in providing these services. And of course, largely that is because of the avoidance of these children going into the foster care system and implicating the per diem that the state pays to foster care families. So we're trying to inch our way back to full funding for the kinship care program. You'll see on line 180 that we're asking for a restoration of $100,000 in previously cut funds. Next on line 181, we're asking for the juvenile data exchange program funding. Just to briefly outline for you, JDEX is a statewide repository related to juvenile delinquency matters in juvenile courts. This enhancement would allow for the day-to-day operation of JDEX to continue for use by juvenile courts statewide. It allows JDEX to increase the number of group users, expand access, and really helps with a unified repository of juvenile data for best practices in juvenile courts. That funding would require $243,945, and that's what we're asking in the big budget. Next, on line 182, we're asking for $236,113 to be added to the big budget for the operation of a weighted caseload project. As you know, the weighted caseload project, this is a one-time funding request. It will be used to contract with the National Center of State Courts to perform an assessment, a comprehensive review, if you will, update and extension of our judicial weighted caseload system to bring it in line with state-of-the-art practices. And as you know, that system is used exclusively in our state to determine the need for additional judicial officers and judges across our state. The last request, which is not included in our budget submissions, but we would like to add to our FY22 budget request, is a one-time ask of $21,600. That is for a child support collaborative grant, federal grant. This is a one-time state match. This is in order to conduct a study to upgrade our child support guidelines. The grantor of that federal grant is the Georgia Department of Human Resources. The federal grant requires a 36% state match, and that state match here would be $21,600, but it is a required and mandated study. And we would ask that that $21,000, which we don't need until July, would be included in the big budget. So I'm happy to answer questions, Mr. Chairman, but those are the budget requests for the supplemental and big budgets on behalf of the Judicial Council.
Thank you, Justice Boggs, and thank you, Chief Justice Melton, for your presentation earlier as well. We've got a few questions here in the audience, and we'll roll through those, and then we may have some more that come in online as well. I think Representative Laricchia, do you have a question? We got 82, and that was on, and then it's back off. Let's see what we got online. Now we got Representative Perkle. Was that inadvertent? Was that on purpose? Okay, here we go.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I was just looking down my notes. The Georgia Courts Registry. This is for Justice Boggs. You mentioned $75,000 on your wish list for fiscal the amended budget for upgrade and maintain of that registry. Is that just a one-time deal, or is this an ongoing expense regarding the Georgia Courts Registry?
Thank you, Mr. Representative. It's my understanding it's a one-time request. The current vendor that provides those services will not support the current software that we have. And so this is a one-time upgrade. If that's different, I will certainly let you know, but that is my understanding, that the request is for a one-time upgrade in order to ensure that all of those 10,000 records are maintainable and accessible by the various entities that use that registry.
Got one online.
And this is from Representative Mary Margaret Oliver. During the pandemic, the courts that do not have e-filing options have been particularly handicapped. Do you think the current restricted options to in-person court traffic will speed e-filing options to more court or for more courts?
If I understand the question, I think the answer is absolutely. Courts that are not technologically wired to conduct their business in a way that maximizes the efficiencies are feeling a lot of pressure to get there. The practical effect of that, though, is that the cost to get there is a new cost that the local governments are carrying. But yes, the pressure is there to develop the electronic options that will make the processes move a lot quicker and a lot more efficiently.
We've got a quick question that came in. I'll ask. Sorry, I think my mic went off on that. You talked about backlog, Chief Justice Melton, and the backlog with the court. The Supreme Court had no backlog, and we understand that's because cases are working their way up through the system that will eventually reach your and Justice Boggs' desk. This may be a better question for Justice Boggs with the council. One of the things that looks like our subcommittee folks are asking about would be the backlog in other courts, cases of courts. So your Superior Court, State Court, Juvenile, et cetera, and also potentially if I'm reading this correctly, the cases that have been filed as well as the cases that have been closed, and trying to look at a comparison so we can see, maybe have an idea of where that log jam is going to be moving and can help you fund appropriately.
So I'll give you, I won't give you hard numbers, but I will give you just some perspective. I will say this, the reason why our court has been able to work without a backlog is somewhat in part due to the cases that aren't coming just yet from the trial court, but also because, probably to a larger extent, we've been able to do 100% of what we need to do virtually without any hardship whatsoever. So we're not as impacted. I just drew a blank on what I was trying to answer for. Oh, the backlog. So if you just look at it from the standpoint of having gone a year without jury trials, you can easily measure that we have a year's worth of jury trials that are waiting to be heard, in addition to the cases that were already sitting in wait. Add to that we will not be able to move through that at the normal pace. So it can easily take a year to up to 2 years to dig out of the jury trial backlog. If that helps, give some perspective there.
It does. Thank you. And just in preparing for when the subcommittees meet, it looks like they may be asking you about the cases that have been filed and closed. Again, not so much in the Supreme Court, but in the lower cases of courts or lower categories of courts. That may come up.
Yes, sir.
I think that's all the questions that we have online and all the ones that we have here in person. Chief Justice Melton, thank you so much for your time that you've given us today, but also that you've given our state as you've moved us through these judicial emergency orders. It's been very well thought out, and I appreciate the diligence that you and the other justices and other members of the judiciary have put into the thought processes involved here.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. It's an honor to be with you today.
Thank you, Justice Boggs.
Thank you. Honored to be with you. Thank you.
I think now we have the Superior Courts are up next, and I believe it's going to be Judge Romero, if I'm correct, and there's others with him as well. Judge Romero, are you online with us now?
Yes, can you see me?
Yes, we can, and if you want to introduce the other folks who are with you, feel free to do so as well.
Well, what I'm going to do is turn this over to Judge Wade Padgett, who has been charged with the task of preparing and presenting today. But let me just say how thankful I am for the opportunity for us to be here and to be with you and to share with you some of our experience at the trial court level over the course of this pandemic. At the same time that we go over our FY21, FY22 budget requests. So we consider it an honor and privilege to be here. At this time, I'm just going to turn it over to Judge Padgett. I'll fill in perhaps a little bit after him with some thoughts and observations to the extent that appears to be necessary, and I'm also available for questions. Judge Padgett.
Thank you, Chairman Tillery, Chairman England. I want to thank you and thank the legislature for allowing us to appear. I know that we are not normally a part of this process, and so your invitation caused us a bit of curiosity initially, but we are extremely grateful for the opportunity to tell you how we have been able to work through the obstacles of COVID. I know we get tired of using the word unprecedented, but unless we were to compare what we have been doing for the last year to what was going on in 1918 and 1919, it would be really hard to compare apples to apples. This is something that none of us were prepared for, and that we scrambled to ensure that our courthouses remained open. You know, when you run for a leadership position in any group, but particularly one like this, you think you know what you're getting into. And past President Sean LaGrua, now Justice Sean LaGrua, President Romero, Secretary Treasurer Art Smith, and I, we had no idea what we were signing up for when we joined leadership of the Council of Superior Court Judges during 2020. And the same is true for the legislature and for the governor and for everybody in the state, frankly. In a moment, I'm going to address all the challenges that we have faced and what we have done to try to work through them. But I think it would be a little disingenuous for us to not acknowledge that while we have had some struggles, there are people in our state, there are colleagues that have lost their lives, and it seems almost by comparison silly sometimes to talk about how we have struggled, but one of our colleagues, Judge Horace Johnson, former president of this council, lost his life on July 1, literally hours after getting off of a Zoom call, a Zoom hearing that he was conducting while he was COVID positive. We have had 3 probate court judges, Nancy Stevenson, Karen Batten, and John Payne, who have all passed away. due to COVID-19 complications. I am aware that recently a municipal court judge, Judge McGovern, has passed away from COVID. So by comparison to their families, we say we understand that we have not struggled. We understand. And we are forever grateful for the devotion and service of those judges. Given how difficult it is to make that transition from that reality to talking about budgets and struggles, I think Judge Johnson would expect nothing less, because he led this organization with a great deal of zeal, and we're going to do the same thing. 2020 presented a huge challenge to our entire state, obviously, and for the superior courts were certainly not immune to that challenge. On a moment's notice, by comparison to centuries and centuries of law, on a moment's notice, we had to rethink and retool a system that not only has the technical challenges that everybody has struggled with, but it has constitutional and legal parameters that we're required to meet, that we can't just gloss over or work through or have a Zoom hearing through. The technology that some of our judges needed wasn't available. You may recall that between probably April and midsummer at least, you couldn't find video cameras and certain computers and certain equipment that they had never had a need for before. Some of our colleagues in rural areas of this state did not have sufficient bandwidth at the courthouses to even make a video hearing possible. So they had to start with internet service providers and trying to get enough bandwidth into the building, then get the technology, then work through the logistics of how to make what has been for centuries an in-person personal event court into a virtual one. Our judges have adamantly, and with the leadership of the Chief Justice, to be fair, have adamantly and consistently maintained and ensured that our courthouses remained open to the public. Our judges are eager to work, and I think that across the state, they've been pretty innovative in how they have gone about figuring out how to make something that has been a personal experience into a virtual one. Judge Tane Kell recently wrote a letter that was published in the Daily Report that talked about his experience during the pandemic. And frankly, he said a lot of what all of our other judges, as I have talked to in preparation for today, have said, that there was an initial slow period where we tried to figure out what to do, that we immediately rolled up our sleeves and realized we had to keep the courts open, that we had to learn technology we didn't know. We had to implement things we didn't have, and we had to go get them, and we had to find PPE for jurors, and we had to figure out how to do things in a way we'd never done them before. So his experience, while the numbers may be different from what he did in his circuit and what somebody else did in their circuit, his experience is strikingly similar to what almost every judge in Georgia has faced. You know, I chuckled when he wrote in that letter that "you are on mute," as a quote, is a part of almost every transcript of every virtual hearing he's conducted, because I'll tell you, in educating lawyers and litigants on how to unmute and turn on the right camera and all of that has proven to be a real struggle for judges, especially when some of us can be technologically challenged at times. Despite those challenges, however, we have closed tens of thousands of cases across the state. We have maintained the guidelines set forth by the CDC and the Georgia Department of Health, and we have kept the legal and constitutional requirements placed on our courts. Our accountability courts, you know, they serve a very vulnerable population, particularly in times of isolation and lack of accountability, hence the name Accountability Court. They have they have found ways to continue to serve this most vulnerable population with technology, with social distancing, and in keeping with all the legal and constitutional obligations placed upon them. They too have adapted during the pandemic and maintained connection with people who occasionally do not want to be connected with. There are a multitude of concerns whenever you try to conduct court virtually. And through massive cooperation from our CSCJ staff, our office people, local governments, the Georgia Department of Corrections, sheriffs throughout the state, members of the Georgia Bar, and frankly, through the sheer ingenuity of some of our judges, we have been able to work through some of these things. Just as an example, we are all keenly aware that people in confinement are a part of a population that we could not allow to be repeatedly potentially exposed to COVID. Not that any population can, but that's one that we were particularly sensitive to. Well, we needed to figure out how to conduct virtual hearings in our local jails. Well, our sheriffs didn't have bandwidth. They didn't have technology. They didn't have computers. And repeatedly across the state, I know we have here in Augusta, we have had sheriffs who have shown a willingness to be open-minded and think outside the box and realize just how valuable virtual hearings can be. Now, I am personally of the opinion that we can't conduct virtual jury trials from beginning to end, but we can do a lot of other things virtually, and we have proven an ability to do that. You know, the DOC almost had to be a little prescient when they enabled video access to inmates back in 2018. During the pandemic, we have had over 1,850 hearings with the DOC via video conferencing to ensure that inmates could have their local matters resolved, while at the same time allowing the prison system to maintain both order and health. As an aside, I know the DOC is interested in reintroducing legislation to allow for use of the video hearings in certain circumstances, and we are wholly supportive of that. I'll tell you, some of the things that we had to learn during the pandemic, we are going to need to maintain post-pandemic. And that is definitely one of them. During the pandemic, the Chief Justice helped us pass some emergency rules, I believe is the way they were phrased, rules of court, that enabled us to use this video technology with the DOC and with our local jails, even beyond what the normal Superior Court rules allowed for. But we're hopeful that the legislature will consider making that a part of the permanent law, because we have learned we can do it efficiently, can do it fairly, and can do it with the Constitution and statutes in mind. Passage of that legislation would benefit everyone, not only from the DOC, but it also benefit local sheriffs, superior courts, reduce costs for public defenders. There are a lot of reasons why that legislation would really, really be helpful. We know that our judges have been working incredibly hard to reimagine what court looks like in a pandemic, but at the same time to ensure that those legal and constitutional rights have been maintained. And, you know, that can really be easier said than done sometimes. The appellate cases, which we are bound by, had all been decided not during a pandemic, but during whatever the old normal was. They talk about, especially in criminal cases, the obligation or the right to confront your accusers. And they said that means face to face. So at the end of the day, we can't conduct jury trials that way, but we can do so many other things, and we have across the state and repeatedly. The one thing that we can't do is jury trials, and many of you are aware that, and I think the Chief Justice said it more eloquently than I'm about to say it, but some parties do not seriously engage in consideration of a settlement or a resolution of their case until there is a live, breathing jury in the hallway. That applies to civil and criminal matters. When you can't do that, that pressure can't be applied, to quote the Chief Justice. For about a 6-week window, maybe 8 weeks, we were allowed to resume jury trials. It took us a while. The Chief Justice knew that if he said jury trials can start tomorrow, it was going to take us probably 30 days to summon jurors and get enough jurors in. Well, everything about jury trials during this pandemic had to be also reimagined. You had to subpoena far more jurors, potential jurors. You can't sit them close to one another in a jury box. You don't want to create some strange aquarium of jurors where you isolate them by plexiglass. So you have to flip the room, basically. I personally had a 3-defendant jury trial November 30th, and we picked the jury in the Civic Center. As you can imagine, the echo in the Civic Center is not good, so we had them all wear headsets that our local government, Richmond County, to be sure, should be congratulated on what they've done to help us conduct jury trials. But they made sure that all of the headsets were available. We figured out how to make your headset hot so you could hear, but when we needed to do other things you couldn't hear if you were the juror. We had to do all of those things and think them through. And we did that. There were people who had been in jail for 2 years in a 3-defendant jury trial. In my particular case, 1 defendant was fully acquitted and 2 were convicted of something. Just understand, those people have been in jail without any possible resolution, and we had not had any jury trials available for them since March. And that was on November 30th, but we were able to do that, and there's stories like that around the state. The Chief Justice, to his credit, perceived that there was another wave of this pandemic coming in December, and he suspended us, kind of saving us from ourselves to ensure that we did not unnecessarily put people at risk. And so whenever they are allowed to resume, that is jury trials, we're going to be busier than we have ever been. You have asked about the backlog. I have been quoted, and I will reiterate, we do not have a single common case management system that's common to all classes of court or even all courts within Superior Court across the state. Therefore, giving you a case count is going to be very, very difficult. I would suggest to you that it is, in my humble opinion, going to take us closer to 3 years to work out of a backlog rather than the 1 or 2 that were previously suggested, because cases continue to come in as cases were not tried. And so it's not like we had a freeze and police officers and others discontinued their work. We still had people being arrested and being charged and who must now be tried or resolved in some way. And so I think that this 1 year of no jury trials, if it's only 1 year, and we can all pray for that, may well take us 3 years to resolve. But that is my personal opinion as to the where we are with the caseload. Now, specifically as to the amended budget, you know that we essentially have 3 parts to our budget, and I use air quotes on that, and that is 1 for the Council Superior Court Judge Office, 1 for the Superior Court judges, and 1 for the Judicial Administrative Districts. As to the Judicial Administrative Districts, the budget cuts that we were forced to adapt to took away almost 100% of their operating budget. These people can be the only lifeline for judges in some circuits, that they provide things as basic as pens and paper, as complicated as computers or building courthouses or caseload management, et cetera. These folks across the state, there's 10 of them, are vital to our continued existence and our continued success, but they have nothing to work with. Many of them lost the rent for their buildings and mileage fees. I mean, they had nothing to help the judges with, barely even maintaining their salaries. The overall hit that they took was almost 100% of their operating funds. We're asking in the amended year budget for them to have essentially what would be left for a quarter of the year, just so that they can provide some of the basic needs for the local judges and for them to get back to being the vital component, cog to this machine or whatever the analogy is, that they have always proven to be. As to the Superior Court judges, we're only asking that you afford us the funds that would allow us to use senior judges for the remainder of this year. Across the state, we use senior judges regularly when things are not in the midst of a pandemic. When we have the availability of senior judges, we can then do two things at once. And that is going to be vital as we continue the vaccination program and we get further and further, hopefully, out of this pandemic. There are no additional requests from the CSCJ staff. With all that being said, I do want to take a moment and talk about the big budget, to quote Justice Boggs. On the big budget, there are 3 judgeships that we have previously been approved to be filled January of 2022. Normally, that would be a process that in 20 they would be approved to start in 21, but given the way the budget was going, they got pushed to 22. And so we're in our big year budget, we're going to have to fund those 3 positions and there's an obligation that we really can't get around, is our contribution to the judicial retirement system. In the big budget, we are asking again to continue to help restore the district court administrators, or the administrative districts program, somewhat close to their prior funding. This takes them probably about halfway to back, or close to halfway to getting back to where they were, and we are asking that be reinstated. We're asking that you eliminate the furlough day requirements for all of the judges across the state that we were able to accommodate, primarily through people taking furloughs through unfilled positions, staff positions, judge positions across the Superior Court judge portion of the budget. We're asking that you restore 5 senior judge days per judge, so that over a year, for example, Judge Padgett or Judge Romero would each have 5 days available that we could use senior judges if we were in a lengthy jury trial, for example. They could handle our uncontested divorces, and they could handle our default judgments, and they could handle TPOs. Every senior judge does something different in every circuit, but they really have proven invaluable. And then for those of you on the committee who are lawyers, the pandemic caused us to lose our subscription to Westlaw. We can't afford Westlaw anymore. That's how tight we run. And so we are asking, we can't have Westlaw Edge anymore, which is an upgrade of the Westlaw that we normally use to find cases and to find statutes and to help draft orders that our staff attorneys use. But a basic Westlaw subscription would cost us $75,000, and we're asking for that. We're having a couple of reductions because we have finished with other things. For example, the new Gwinnett judge and the new Griffin judge, all their funding has already been done. So we're returning some funds back in that way. To those in the legislature, I know my time is short. I want to tell you, we know that you have an impossible job. It is very, very difficult to juggle all the things that you have to juggle. I will tell you, we do too. And it's really, really hard for us to juggle everything and to maintain the obligations mandated by the Constitution, mandated by statute, mandated by the appellate courts of this state and the federal appellate courts. But I will tell you, my colleagues and I have, excuse my language, have worked our ass off, and we have done everything we know how to do to make sure that we do our duty. We do it timely, and we do it correctly. So with that being said, I'll be happy to answer any questions that may exist.
Thank you, Judge Padgett. I think we do have a few questions. Chairman England, let's start with the ones online, if that's okay.
All right. So I've got one, is all I've got right now online, and it comes from Chairman Fleming. Could the Superior Court Counsel please put forth language to us for legislation that would accomplish the need that you have for virtual hearings? You're just asking for some recommendations. Yes.
Yes, sir, Chairman Fleming. I know that during the last session, the DOC proposed, and I do not know the bill number. I'm sorry. I apologize for that. And I know that there was some controversy, and Lord knows y'all know better than anybody that the the end of the session was not chaotic. I'm not trying to go there, but maybe chaotic. It was very, very difficult to get things done, so it was struck down. I do not know what the objections were. I know at one point there were some objections, but we have worked pretty closely with the DOC in developing the language of the bill that they plan to propose, and we remain willing and able to be a voice in that process to ensure that we take care of anybody's concerns, but also make sure that the DOC, that the bill, because it just benefits everybody. And so we'll be happy to do that. So short answer, Chairman Fleming, yes, sir. Thank you very much.
All right, that's all I've got from online questions.
Do we have any questions from any members who are in person in the audience? We don't see any other questions here in the audience. Judge Padgett, Judge Romero, thank you for your presentation. Thank y'all for being present with us here today.
Thank you, gentlemen. Thank you very much. Thanks, committee.
Thank you. It's an honor.
Members of the committee, we are now at the lunch hour. We're going to break for lunch. We will be back at 1 p.m. and hear from Commissioner Russell McMurray from the Department of Transportation. We stand in recess.